It was naive of me to think that justice was always served in the courts of law, often identifying them as buildings with high plinths, long walkways, large rooms with the typical setup that we see in movies and TV shows. I had no idea what restorative justice was up until 2 years ago. And because I did not think it was possible to create spaces for conflict resolution and reconciliation outside of the courts, the first time I saw circle work being done within the restorative justice method in a beautiful garden by the river, I was surprised by the candidness and vulnerability of the circle participants and how deeply satisfying the process was. Our guest today, Shailly Agnihotri, is the founder of the Restorative Centre in New York, which she started in response to the heartbreak she experienced as a public defender trying to attain justice for her clients. Shailly has spent more than 20 years as an attorney, with expertise in criminal justice through working as a prosecutor in the Orleans Parish, teaching at the Georgetown Law School and Southern University Law Center, and as a public defender in New York City. I am Vaishnavi Shukla, and this is Architecture of Centre, a podcast where we highlight unconventional design perspectives, practices, and research projects that reflect emerging discourses within the design discipline and beyond. Architecture of Centre features conversations with radical designers, thinkers, and change makers who are redefining the way we live and interact with the built environment. Let's ease into our conversation by understanding what restorative justice is and what is it that we're seeking to restore. If you could also talk about your experience as a public defender and how that led you to starting the Restorative Justice Center.
The definition of restorative justice is really, I think, evolving and requires sort of an evolution of thought for all of us to come to terms with what it is that we're seeking to restore. At this moment, I would say that what we're seeking to restore is a multi-layered. At a most primal level, we're seeking to restore our own disconnect to our essence and ourselves. And building from that, recalibrate our relationship to others so that we together as a community can build systems and institutions and visions of justice that serves who we truly are. I think that is as deep as I can go at this time, but I'm sure that as we continue to evolve these thoughts, it can go deeper than that. What I would reject is a superficial label being placed on restorative justice as merely a band-aid or a reactive model of engagement rather than a responsive model of engagement that is building systems together. So I love talking to an architect because I really do think of restorative justice as structural. This structural space that we create in a circle is also the structure of how we land the structure in the world on solid footing in some bedrock of human connection, so that we're not building upon fractured ground. We're not becoming just an ancillary building to a building that is crumbling, as I believe the criminal justice arena is. So that we're not just under the umbrella of systems that are dysfunctional, but we are creating our own solid structures together. So I do think of it as structures, not only in relation to the environment, but also the structure that we create within the space of circle work. So you've sort of started with a heavier question. So you said, let's start light. I'm like, oh, that is the question. But I think that and answering it in any superficial way is not doing justice to the true power and potential of restorative justice. So I do want to start, I do want to be starting with that framework.
And if we can talk about your journey a little bit and how you shifted from the very structural or functional, or however we want to call it the criminal justice system to the restorative justice system?
So I practiced law for more than 25 years, I guess. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a public defender. I am still a law professor. And also I have worked as a administrative law judge. So I've been a judge. So I've really gotten to know the American experience with the criminal legal system from the inside. And I really love the US Constitution. I love the Constitution. I love the vision behind it. I love the idea of really be holding the government back, modulating the propensity of governments for tyranny. I love the constitutional protections that are given the accused in the United States pursuant to the Constitution. The journey from that vision of what the constitutional protections are for the American experience and the reality on the ground, it is really worth for me. It's been really interesting to how do we get where we are? Like, why, when we have this beautiful vision of presumed innocence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you don't have to testify against yourself. You have to be able to look at a witness in the eye when they testify against you. You have a right to cross-examination. You have a right to counsel to assist you. These are beautiful ideals. And how the implementation of those ideals, which is always the challenge for humans, is we have these visions, but when we start implementing it, we rub against the internal and the personal shadows, the community shadows, and the civilization shadows, meaning that the parts of our civilization that we have not addressed with a clear eye, the unspoken truths, and those unspoken truths end up being the power that ends up building structures that are dysfunctional. Like I've just said a lot, but I think, the conclusion I came to in a very painful conversation with one of my clients when he was in the process of deciding whether to go to have a trial. This was in New York City while I was a public defender. The jury pool was waiting outside. The district attorney had offered him, I don't remember exactly the number, but let's say 8 years if he were to take a plea. And if he were to go to trial, he was facing 15, 20 years. And the Supreme Court said that my obligation as a defense attorney was not only to try cases, but to actually advocate for a resolution on behalf of my client that was in his best interest. So these are conversations that public defenders around the country are having every day with this client. This was nothing unusual about it. But what was interesting at that moment in time is that we all have sort of these go-to language that we use in certain situations. And at that moment, my go-to language was, look, I'm a great trial attorney. I've tried hundreds of cases, but I'm telling you that the possibility of you winning is slim because these are the documents that have already been given, and these are the witnesses, and you have a bad record. You can't testify. Okay. So we're doing all this, and the client looks at me behind the bars, and we're speaking in the correction facility. And he says, and this is an older gentleman, he says, "Miss, this isn't fair." And I look at him, and I've had this conversation hundreds of times already by this time. And I look at him and I say, "Are you kidding me? You're looking for fairness here?" And, and we had this meeting of the minds, which was actually kind of like we both burst out laughing, like, what a farce. Like, we're sitting in the so-called hall of justice. There is no discussion about justice anymore. And nobody pretends that there is. This is just making choices. You're between a rock and a hard place, and you're just making the choice there. There is no aspirational aspects to this anymore. And, there is some aspect of the work of a public defender or anybody that engages in the criminal legal system of understanding that you feel like a cog in the wheel. You're just keeping the system going without addressing the bigger picture. Yeah. So I sort of gave myself a mandate because I have tremendous amount of educational, resources that have been given me I've been, gifted experiences that very few people have the privilege of having. That if I can't tackle this myself, like who else is going to do this? Like if I can't say, what is another system of what are we missing here? What is another approach towards justice that I could begin this journey of looking for it. And the terminology, so I became a certified mediator, looked at that model. I studied the peacekeeping model of the indigenous people as it's articulated these days. I studied these sentencing circle models that are being taught as restorative justice. And nothing really seemed to land to me as what we needed in this moment of time, because either these systems of restorative justice were just ancillary to the existing systems, sort of like these so-called reform movements within the criminal legal system, that to me actually did the opposite of what they were pretending to do, or the propaganda was about it, which is they were just giving people within the system that, one person out of a million got some kind of process that's different. Therefore, we all should get award and medals and acknowledged for being our visionaries, whereas nothing's really changing for the rest of the people in the system. So, so the idea of restorative justice seemed intriguing and interesting. And I went to the country of Jamaica because they had some money to start community-based restorative justice circles. And I went and spoke to those facilitators there. I went to the Rastafarian, I went to Trenchtown, and there was a Rastafarian man that would come to the community center, and I got the privilege of speaking to him. And I'm like, why do you come here? Why do you come to this restorative justice center? And he said one of the most interesting things that anybody said about restorative justice that really shifted my perspective. And he said, I come here because I'm giving the government a chance to restore its relation to my community. And I thought, that's pretty profound. There's so many ruptured relationships that, so what I'm really trying very hard to do in my work is reframe the conversation between, beyond this sort of binary thought process of offender victim. We're going to sit in a circle and somehow everything's going to be fine, because it's not addressing the most profound issues. And it's also creating this false narrative that that you can actually enter a restorative justice process with a label of offender and victim and get to any meaningful conversations. Yes, you can come to some kind of resolution that feels much more humane than what, a sentence by a judge, but it's a sliver of the reality of the possibility.
That gives me so many ideas and so many questions at the same time, but from an outsider's view, or from an outsider's perspective, just looking at the process and kind of underscoring the word justice, and you mentioned it's kind of the big word. I wanted to dwell on a few ideas that I automatically think about in an almost progressive manner when I think about justice, right? So, and I want to be mindful when I use the word crime, and I'll try to phrase it as I think about it. So there's conflict, or quote unquote crime. There's grievance, confrontation, acknowledgement, acceptance, resolution, or in, a criminal justice system, punishment. And they're somehow all interconnected in this very complicated nexus with the overarching big word justice. Now, from my understanding, in the restorative justice process, the circle plays a major role in everything that happens after the conflict, which is all the way from confrontation to resolution. I want to probe a little bit on creating a space, which is, I don't mean space just physically because I'm an architect, but also metaphorically to facilitate the restorative justice process. And if we can also touch upon the idea or the role of a circle keeper and how this space with capital S is conducive for the circle keeper to do the kind of structural work that is required in the restorative justice system?
Okay, I'm going to sort of get into a little bit of professor mode now.
Yes,
so you
please.
said a lot. You made a conclusion about restorative justice that I have to really unwind a bit. You said restorative justice is after a response to something, and I would have to disagree with that.
Please push back. This is.
Yeah, I have to disagree with that definition. It's not even a pushback. It's just not my definition that I can adopt. This is what I was saying earlier. Thinking that restorative justice is just an answer to a conflictual situation is missing the power and potential of restorative justice. Restorative justice is about reconnecting to ourselves and each other. If you create those bonds in communities, then conflicts have a space to be unraveled instead of becoming charged with dysfunctional behavior. So this is what I want to say, because you vote, circling the same thought from different vantage points, but this is what needs to be said as from a.
If I can reiterate in a more, again, amateurish way, do we mean that it's more, maybe not the right word, preventative instead of remedial in a certain way?
The way that I would say it, that language, that language sits better in me. But one way to look at it is that maybe I'd like to share with you, and maybe this, works for both of us, is that we're building in wartime. What does that mean? So there's a war going on, limbs are being blown off over there. And here we are sitting in our little space, creating structures for human beings to coexist in a more easeful relation with each other, not excising members of the community with conflict, but actually welcoming them back in, because understanding that we're one of the whole. So it's almost like we're sitting here giving herbs for building up immunity, and people are yelling wait, those people their limbs are being blown up. Why are you sitting here giving herbal remedies? Because we need both. We can't just be navigating the world that requires constant attention because of extreme conflict, so that all of our resources are just reacting to the world, because then we're not building anything new, right? So it's kind of it's both. It's both sitting in a space, building relations, creating new formulations of human engagement and systems of human engagement, not new, but reimagining the human systems of human engagement for the current time, so that we can sit in spaces together and build together, yet also have a system in place so that when conflicts arise, there is a potential to resolve them without falling into the deficit model, meaning that one person wins, one person loses. Instead, thinking that we are all in this together, and have to get to the other side. So that, sending somebody off to prison for 20 years and then they coming back to the community, part of us has gone away to the prison. We've all been in prison for 20 years. When that person comes back, we all need to be reunited and integrated from the lessons learned from the people gone and the people that are here. This is a community crisis that is happening, that we are no longer aware of our true essence individually and collectively. And therefore we are thriving. The world is thriving by dividing us from ourselves. So this is an antidote to the us versus them model of the world. That's why I don't want to formulate the restorative justice process in that victim offender model and take that binary thought into a system that can create a whole different paradigm.
As we continue our conversation with Shailly, here's a snippet of our upcoming conversation with criminal psychologist Pia Pulokka, who has been working on the Smart Prison project in Finland.
There must be a balance between the punishment side, which is inevitable since it's a prison sentence, and the rehabilitative side, which anyway provides prisoners services during their prison sentence in order to have an effect on their risk levels, recidivism, and in order to reintegrate them back to the society.
Tune into our next episode to learn more about how Pia and her team are using digital services for rehabilitation, integration, and education of prison inmates. I mean, while you're talking about it, I'm almost thinking that we're taking off the labels of victim offender, victim accused, all of the above. But I also want to, talk about the power equation somehow, because in our initial conversation, you mentioned the circle as a place of holding space for discomfort. And the circle inherently as a geometric form makes sure that everybody who's part of the circle is at an equal footing. There's nobody who's at the focus of the circle.
So beautiful. Can I just read to you a part of the essay that one of the original people that were involved in creating our specific model at the Restorative Centre, what he wrote? Can I just read you a paragraph?
Yes, please.
He's actually an artist in Newburgh, New York. His name is John Delk, and he wrote this beautiful, and he's an artist, so this is also related. I just thought of this instantly when you started speaking. Okay, it's called On Circles by John Delk. Circles because they connect. They do not start and end at points, but flow and accommodate many while privileging none. Circles are created and held together by their makers. They're brought into existence by presence. They are a gift collectively given. A line can never be so beautifully alive. A line sacrifices all for a point and is walked along alone. Missiles travel in straight lines aimed at targets. A circle is sitting amongst others together to allow a collective knowledge to surface. Circles are like radios tuned to frequencies of shared wisdom that cannot be otherwise heard. Lines are ruled in a binary fashion and measured on a grayscale. Circles move like waves and function as prisms, which make spectrums visible. Lines clear-cut, divide, and conquer. Circles meander and move in response to the terrain shaped by voices that generate unique contours of infinite variations. Lines are limited to agendas harboring specific meanings and interpretations. Circles generate meaning as a conduit for open interpretation. A line is a means to an end. Circles are ends in themselves. They ripple out rather than cut through.
That's beautiful.
So there is a profound experience of circles when they form. And I would take it a step further, saying just putting chairs in a circular formation does not a circle make. Yeah, there is an energetic aspect that can be invoked in a circle formulation, or can be ignored. Like, right, a lot of us. I mean, just putting chairs in a formation. Yes, it does create the possibility of that energetic experience, but does not in of itself do so. So the circle keepers, getting back to your question, we train our circle keepers in a formulation of the circle process that is based, like it's sort of, there are many modalities that use 4-act structures. Plays use it, but so there's a 4-act structure to sort of complete the journey. There's the medicine wheel, and the way that it's articulated in many indigenous civilizations, so that the medicine wheel has 4 directions, and that you start and you have to sort of go all the way around to really complete the journey. So we sort of approach the circle process with this understanding of structure within the space that we are creating to create a landscape for the most difficult conversations to unfold. So that we believe that starting with the place of conflict is not recommended, that really finding the place of human connections is the way to go forward into discussing the issues that divide us. And the way that we've come to understand how we create this space for human connections is very specific. because it's not just stories about our psychodynamics or emotions or feelings, because actually those can often disconnect us from each other. They're culturally specific. They're sometimes rooted in narcissistic disorders that most of us are prone to right now in this world. Like everybody wants to talk about my feelings, my this, my that. So instead, we talk about, we have created prompts that are specifically aligned with the elemental qualities of being alive on this planet and the experience, individual human experience of that. And that sounds very abstract, but it's really about connecting to the elements on this planet, the air, water, fire, earth, and sharing those as human. And what I find is that those are instantly compelling human stories. And you can share those prompts anywhere in the world, and any human being really would have a relationship to the elements of the earth. So that we build in the most primal resonance of being alive on this planet. And from that sort of awakening of ourselves in that way, we can sort of dissect the specific ways our human existence has caused, rupture with another. So we really reclaim humanity first.
Would you say this is another way or another medium to practice empathy, or am I off track?
No, absolutely.
But what you said is so profound, and when you put it that way in terms of natural elements, that is the one common thread, just thinking about constants and variables. But I'm going to step back a little bit, because you read that wonderful piece by an artist, and your team at the Restorative Centre is very diverse. You, of course, have lawyers in the team, but you also have architects, artists, yoga practitioners, and healers on board. In a traditional justice system and the physical infrastructure that supports that system, vis-a-vis the courts, you would never find people from other backgrounds become a part of the justice process. And because I am an architect, I'm going to ask you a speculative question. In an ideal world where restorative justice becomes the new status quo, what kind of an institution do you imagine replaces the existing setup? What are the courtrooms replaced by? What are the long corridors replaced by? What are the high plinths and the grand staircases replaced by? What are the new spaces that we can design to holistically encompass the restorative justice process?
Wow, that's fun. That's fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. So I just want to say one little, I'm being very specific, and this is my training, but so I'm not advocating for 100% abolition of the criminal legal system. I am, because I believe we need the criminal legal system there are some sociopaths in the planet.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of them happen to be politicians. Some of them happen to be police officers. Some of them happen to be white collar criminals. It's not all just one, the communities that are currently being targeted. So I believe that there is a way to formulate the constitutional provisions in an equitable way where people feel, the courts are upholding some ideals of justice with regard to the broader issues that really need space to be addressed. Like, think about corporate criminal behavior. Think of, all the things I've just said. I believe that there is a place for the courts. I'm not saying 100% tear them all down. But what I do think is that right now, the way we're using it is to oppress and fund certain segments of society. I'll just leave it. Okay. As far as the beautiful vision of freestanding spaces where community members are coming together to sit in a shared space of power to unwind and connect, that just makes my heart soar to imagine these. I would love them to be reclaim some of our spaces that, like, nature. I'm not an architect, but I can feel the beauty of these spaces in my body, if you know what I'm saying. I cannot imagine what you're going to create, but I imagine them to be sort of community-based in this beautiful sort of gift to ourselves, right? Instead of, oh, I'm going up the steps to surrender my humanity to the altar of the criminal legal system. It's like you enter these spaces and you're like, this is a gift we're giving each other to come together in this way. It's sort of this, I don't know, I have this almost like fantasy novel vision right now in my head of like, streams and flowers and rocks and like, a place for fire. Like, so just sort of honoring Earth once more, and therefore honoring ourselves as inhabitants on this beautiful planet. That's what I imagine when you started speaking. What do you imagine? I'm really curious what you would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. While I was thinking about the questions, I was thinking about, what if tomorrow maybe you come to me with a brief that you have this piece of land and you want to create a restorative justice system. And I was like, how would I approach this as a design brief? And I kind of hit a blank wall because by default, the way the whole idea of justice, the way it's drilled into our brains is that it has to look like a courtroom. And that's flawed, right? Could we directly relate justice to places that have those corridors and those places that have courtrooms and high plinths and these grand staircases? And I was like, well, is this again a fundamental issue of how we think about justice and the places that can provide justice? Well,
right. It's almost debatable. Like, so we use this expression, reclaim justice, at TRC. And that's sort of what we're talking about, right? So if the community has reclaimed justice, right, as this, we're going to get to our humanity. We're going to get there humbly. We're going to sort out this complexities of living together. Like it for me, it is a circle, right? It's a space that can hold a circle. It's a circle that can expand or constrict as needed, right? So you can have 5 people, you can have 30 people. So you need movable chairs, right? You need a space that lets in the light, lets in the elements. So you feel a sense of grace in this space that, that you're humbled by being on this planet. You're not humbled by the power of another person. You're humbled by this planet, like right where we're gifted this life here. And then you can see everybody in the circle so that the circle is created so that, there's space, you can make eye contact with everybody. There's a space for the centerpiece so that you can have this common, centerpieces are really important in our work for me. So I've had circles and in schools with no windows. So I go in there and I'm going to have a circle. So what do? I move all the chairs to the side, just so a desk to the side. I put a round tablecloth in the middle, and we represent each of the elements of this planet on the centerpiece. So we put rocks down, we put fresh flowers, we put usually a candle, or sometimes only once have I not been allowed to do a candle, but I usually get by and do it. We put a bowl of water, and we put other items that we would use as talking pieces. So it's like I bring the earth to the center of the work because that's where I believe the center of the work is. So I can imagine, like, if we had that experience of the centerpiece, not just between us, but around us, it would be so magical. Oh my gosh.
Again, see, that's the issue with the way even we as architects think about spaces, right? Until you mentioned nature and the elements, fire and water and rocks. That is when I started thinking about it as not necessarily, again, a place that is rigid, but something that is almost, like a retreat of sorts, that allows you to not be constricted by the physical environment you're in, but also expands it to places that can be outdoors. Maybe you can.
We've had circles outdoors for sure.
Pretty sure I'm gonna go ahead and sketch something and put my thoughts down, but I would never have thought about it in the way you described. So thank you for igniting a little flame.
I just want to say something, because what you just said was really interesting to me. So the idea, so the word that came to you is retreat, right? So so like that's an interesting word, right? Retreat is like, so retreat is like in a war, like what's going on now, right? Retreat is stepping back from engagement, right? Or leaving the world and finding some solace or something. But
Well, I was actually thinking about it more in terms of like a wellness retreat, where
right now,
where you
I know, but the word is interesting. So
yeah, sure, sure.
I'm just like fascinated by that choice of word. And I'm thinking, even a wellness retreat, right? That means you're leaving the world to just go replenish yourself, right?
Absolutely.
That's what it is, right? But what I want to expand this idea a little bit in your brain, thinking about it's not, it needs to be the town center, this place. Like it's not to leave the world, it's to engage with the world with new tools. So I mean, so if I could just add this to your mind, like it would be beautiful if these spaces were in the town center. It was like the center of the community, the way
Sure.
like you look at indigenous communities, that it's they're sometimes formulated in a circle. So the
Mm.
center is the community is the center. So it's also it's bigger than just the space, because it's also around about what's around it. Like what, because I don't imagine it's like, oh, you have to drive 2 hours from town to get there. No,
Yep, yep.
it's right there, and it's accessible to all. It's we've had circles in barbershops because we didn't, we were having circles in an art gallery, and then it's like, well, some people didn't want to go to an art gallery, so let's start in a barbershop. Then it
Yeah.
was like, so let's have it outside. So we've had circles all kinds of different places. But there is something beautiful about, yeah, I don't know. Is it like a nomadic idea also of circles, that you can create these like sort of like this, this tent or something that just can be plopped up everywhere? I don't know. It's so interesting though.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think what you're talking about is the question of access and inclusion, right? You want to make sure that that place, or that space rather, that you create is inclusive to everybody, and that everybody has access to that. Because art galleries, I mean, I've learned now, are not the most inclusive public spaces. So
It's about reimagining public spaces for sure. I
oh,
think that is,
100%, 100%.
yeah.
I currently work with a public artist who creates all sorts of crazy places for people to come together and talk about civic issues. Civic issues, nothing to do with justice, but at least there's space for those conversations to happen about what that
But I
public
just
space.
have to I'm sorry, once more say civil issues are one of the building blocks of justice. So I would
Yeah.
have to say it is justice.
Yeah. Just simple things like, potholes and water supply issues and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
But
That's justice. That is justice. That is about getting to justice for sure.
yeah, well, to appease my curiosity, Shailly, I'm extremely excited to, see what's next in the pipeline, and what's next for you, and what's next for the Restorative Centre.
I'm curious too. I mean, I took this work on as my dharma. I really enjoy thinking about Vedic philosophy. And I sort of think of it as what I'm supposed to be doing. So I never looked at it as anything more than the work I'm supposed to do. And so with that, I feel like my role is to continue to stay aligned so that I can answer, what is next. Like I answer the meet the moments. The way I'm defining the work right now is that we are deeply looking at together the shadows of the American civilization, which is very hard work. We've been holding space, for example, in June in Jackson, Mississippi, to families of lynching victims from the South. We've been working with organizations that are national, that have a history of have a troubling history past, or engage with systems with racism or sexism embedded therein. We're working with school systems that are trying to figure out ways to work or have systems of disciplinary recourse that are not punitive and destructive. So it's almost like we have this beautiful vision of America, and we have this very dark shadow, this abyss that we need to look at. So right now, the work with our circles is very intense work. It's really the work of the moment, from my point of view, is looking at the things that have been ignored or not reckoned with, bringing some truth to it, holding space for the voices that need expression, learning from each other. So right now we're in the process, I feel, as an organization, meeting the moment in this country where that's where the needs are right now. Going forward, I think these conversations are going to have to continue for some time, and hopefully not too long in the future, we can start to build the spaces that you're talking about, so that they are embedded within communities everywhere, so that because right now all the structures that exist actually are moving energy away from each other. Like when you walk into a court system, you bifurcate from the other people. You create your own space. Almost all spaces that exist now as people in this country are dividing us further and further from each other. So if this vision of creating spaces that hold the potential for human beings to engage with each other with a new energetic formulation, which spaces to hold specific energy potential, is the vision. So it's a vision that's rooted in sort of a long-term process of work that is unfolding right now.
I would love to offer myself in any capacity that I can be helpful whenever you start with that process. I'd love to be a part
now.
of it.
Today is the day. Start drawing. Thank you. What a beautiful offer. And I accept. There's so much work to be done.
On that note, thank you so much for your time, Shailly. This was, I don't know, I want to call it a deeply nourishing interview, but this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for reaching out. It was great to talk to you.
Special thanks to Ayushi Thakur for the research and design support, and Kahan Shah for the background score. You can follow us on Instagram at Arc of Centre and subscribe to our newsletter through our website arcofcentre.com. That is ARCHOFFCENTRE. Thanks for listening.